What's up YouTube, it's Ravlar here and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be reviewing Mutated Barge, and I know this video is slightly delayed, but unfortunately I have been quite unwell, so please do forgive me. But anyway, if you guys are new around here, make sure you subscribe for lots of RS3 content. Check me out on Twitch and Twitter. I'm streaming 5 days a week now and it is pretty lit, if I may say so myself. Just one more thing before we get started, guys. So, as I just mentioned, I am streaming a lot, and I have made friends with one really awesome streamer called Lusima. He streams Iron Man content 5 to 6 days a week for 10 hours a day. The guy is a legend, and he is moving over to YouTube to try and make some YouTube content. And as we need some more RS3 YouTubers in our community, I'd really appreciate it if you guys go over there and subscribe and give his video some feedback and some love, because at the end of the day, we are a community and we need to help each other out. And trust me, starting off on YouTube is tough, so yeah, please do help him out and show him some love. But anyway, guys, let's get right into today's video. So before we start analysing the mutated variant, let's have a quick look at the normal barge ability. It is a basic ability, it breaks free of any binds that you may have, and it deals 125% weapon damage to your opponent, and it binds them in place for 6.6 seconds. And it's kind of a surge towards a target, which is pretty useful for mobility, but nothing else really. Now, if you have the mobile perk worn while using the barge ability, the cooldown goes from 20 seconds to 10 seconds, but you do not get any adrenaline for using the ability, and this applies to the mutated version as well. So yeah, we're going to touch on that in a little bit. So to unlock the mutated variant of Barge, you need to use a codex from the final boss of ED2, and that goes from anything from 100ml I've heard to 150ml, so please don't quote me on those prices as they do of course vary. So the mutated Barge ability deals a base damage of 125%, but this increases by 10% for every 0.6 seconds since you last hit your current target. Now after 4.8 seconds, the ability damage is capped at 225% weapon damage, but we also gain an additional buff that allows our next channeled melee attack to turn into a damage over time attack instead. So if we have waited the 4.8 seconds and then use Mutated Barge, the following Fury, Assault, Flurry, Destroy or Frenzy will act as a damage over time attack instead of a channeled ability. Although in theory all of those abilities could turn into bleeds, the only ones that we are realistically going to be using as that is Assault and Destroy. Even though they are damage over time attacks, they are not the same as normal bleeds because they are affected by the buff by Zerk, and also they do have the option to critical hit, which normal bleeds do not. Additionally, it's worth noting that the channeled variation of these abilities allow you to have a separate hit chance for each hit, whereas the damage over time variants of these abilities do not have that benefit. So if you splash the first hit, unfortunately that means that none of the successive hits will actually go through. Now let's take a look at this ability in action to analyse it further. So if you've waited the 8 ticks before using Mutated Barge, you get the full buff in terms of damage, but you also get the ability to turn a channeled ability into a damage over time ability. Now you can tell when the 8 ticks are up because you get a little barge icon on your buff bar, meaning that you're ready to go to get the maximum benefit out of Mutated Barge. Now once you Mutated Barge, you get a little exclamation box timer on your buff bar which counts down from 6 seconds. Now once you've used Mutated Barge, this timer lets you know how much time you have to use a channeled ability to turn into a damage over time ability. If you use a channeled ability within these 6 seconds, it turns into a damage over time ability. If you use it after these 6 seconds, unfortunately it does not work, and it only works with the first channeled ability you use, so don't use something silly like normal Fury. So first things first, when you're choosing a new target, unfortunately you do not get any of the damage buffs from Mutated Barge. It basically just acts as a normal barge, and another problem with this is that there is a massive glitch in game where if you don't land an auto attack, sometimes the first ability that you use does not give you adrenaline, which in this case is Barge. Now I am aware that there is a glitch in game where you choose your new target and then click on the floor, then Mutated Barge, and it gives you a 225% weapon damage ability, but this is not intended and I'm sure it's going to be fixed, so unfortunately we're not going to be taking this into consideration. I hope you understand. Anyway, moving on, let's look at Mutated Barge in combat. So if we choose to use Mutated Barge as a normal ability without waiting for any sort of time before attacking the boss, it turns from 125% weapon damage ability to 135% weapon damage ability, and unfortunately this just doesn't cut it. It's only slightly stronger than Tuskar's Wrath, and because melee has so many strong basic abilities, we completely disregard this from any sort of basic rotation that we have. Furthermore, it's important to note that it's absolutely 100% not worth just standing around waiting for Mutated Barge to get its damage buff, because you're wasting adrenaline and you're wasting damage, so don't do that. Don't do that, otherwise the June song will kill me for teaching you the wrong thing. But where Mutated Barge can become useful is when we have to wait for something. Now, some boss mechanics mean that we can't attack the boss for an X amount of time, and during that time, because we aren't able to attack the boss, Mutated Barge does get a buff. So let's assume a hypothetical scenario where we wait 8 game ticks and they are all lossless because we can't attack the boss. If this is the case, Mutated Barge has gained its maximum damage buff, and once we activate it, it will do a total of 225% weapon damage. Now, this makes it our strongest basic ability, but there is another stronger option, and that is to use a two-handed auto attack stacked with a 188% weapon damage ability like Cleave. Now, overall, this is way more damage than a 225% Barge, so this is probably best to use for a lot of scenarios. Not only is the overall damage output from this combination much higher, but we also get 3% extra adrenaline from the two-handed auto attack. Now, the issue with Mutated Barge here is that we can't use an auto attack with Mutated Barge because the auto attack resets the damage buff timer for Mutated Barge itself, which means that we're stuck with just using Mutated Barge on its own, or a high damage ability plus the auto attack. Now, based on everything I've just said, you may think that Mutated Barge is completely useless, but there are some things that we need to consider which could be game changers. Firstly, let's consider how Barge itself as an ability works. Basically, it drags you MD to the target and does an attack straight away. Now, this is very important because if you're far away from the target, you're obviously going to be wasting time moving towards your target to actually get away your auto attack followed by an ability. Alternatively, you could have used Mutated Barge, got there a few seconds earlier and stacked Mutated Barge with another ability. Now, choosing whether to do an auto attack plus a basic ability or to use Mutated Barge is a very scenario specific question, and the question that you need to ask yourself is, am I far enough away to justify using Mutated Barge? Now, if the answer to that is yes, well, go ahead and use it. If not, just use an auto attack plus a strong basic ability, because that will give you more overall damage and adrenaline gain. Now, the aforementioned scenario is if you're building with basics and you are under 100% adrenaline. Now, when Mutated Barge comes into its own is when you're at 100% adrenaline and you have to wait a period of time before you can attack the boss again, and during this period of time, Mutated Barge gets its buff. Now, if this is the scenario, use Zerk, Mutated Barge, Adrem Pot, Basic, and then do either Assault or Destroy. Now, in this scenario, you forego your auto attack plus your basic, because the time saved from turning Assault or Destroy into a damage over time ability is a massive DPS increase, because you can literally fit 2 more basics in that time, which overall is very, very helpful and a lot stronger than just an auto attack. So these are the scenarios where you really get value for money with Mutated Barge, and the best way to utilize this is to predict when the boss is going to do a mechanic which prevents you from attacking it, and you can prepare by making sure that you have 100% adrenaline before this, so you're ready to Zerk and do some mad deeps. Now earlier I said, don't be that guy who just stands around in the middle of combat doing nothing for a few seconds to get the Mutated Barge buff. But there are sometimes scenarios where you actually are not engaged with the boss for a small period of time, a time less than 8 ticks. Now if this is the case, I'm going to leave it up to your personal judgment whether you should wait and then do your Mutated Barge so you can get a damage over time buff, or whether you Mutated Barge straight away. Unfortunately, there is no correct answer, it's really up to you to judge the situation. Now, something else which I've noticed while testing Mutated Barge is that if you don't attack your target for a certain period of time, you actually lose your target, so then when you actually re-aggro the target in Mutated Barge, you get no buff whatsoever. Now this is very frustrating, and I really hope Jagex do fix this because it really devalues Mutated Barge. There are actually quite a few scenarios where you're not actually aggressive towards the boss for a long period of time, but when you re-aggro on him for the next phase or whatever, you actually do not get the benefit of using Mutated Barge, and most of the time you don't even get adrenaline, so that really sucks. I really hope it's looked into because it needs to be fixed. Now the final thing which I want to address in reviewing this ability is a Zerk Rotation where we stall and wait for Mutated Barge to get its full buff. Now my friend Knight sent me a rotation whereby we step away from the target, anticipate, Zerk, and then Mutated Barge back onto the target, which if done correctly gives us the maximum damage for Mutated Barge and allows us to benefit from the damage over time special. Now what this actually allows us to do is bleed the Assault, then do a Hurricane, then a Mutated Flurry, and then a Forceful Backhand, allowing us to fit a massive 4 thresholds into the Zerk Rotation, and it's definitely very strong, but I just haven't got around to testing it, so that's something which I need to look into personally. If you're someone who's good with numbers, etc., please do offer some help, it would really help me out, and I'd love to make a video in depth on this rotation and compare the overall damage output to an alternative Zerk rotation which I normally use. So let's look at everything we've just said by overviewing the pros and cons of the ability. I think the first real pro for this ability is that it is a high damaging basic ability which instantly brings you MD to the target you have. Now this is useful in some scenarios, but of course we did mention earlier that a 188% basic attack plus an auto attack is an overall more damage, but in some scenarios where you're far away from the boss, using Mutated Barge to get there instantly is definitely a pro. Now secondly, there are some scenarios where you're Zerked and you use Mutated Barge and you're able to convert a channeled ability into a damage over time ability, which means you can do a huge amount of DPS in a small period of time. This is definitely the main selling point of this ability, I feel, and it's very, very cool. Finally, I feel that Mutated Barge really adds some versatility to melee. Like, I know that they said that they wanted it so that, you don't need to be restricted by the fact that you need to be MD, and to a certain extent I think this does that, especially in combination with the other two abilities, but I still feel that melee needs some sort of buff, and maybe Mutated Barge could have a buff whereby auto attacks do not reset the cooldown on the damage timer. Let me know what you think of that down below. Now time to look at the cons, and the first one that springs to mind is the fact that unfortunately we're not able to benefit from mobile anymore because we need the adrenaline from Mutated Barge, and if you're like me and spent a long time trying to get Cracking 3 mobile, removing it is going to be very painful. Secondly, there are a lot of adrenaline and retargeting issues with Mutated Barge. For example, there are several bosses where you need to wait a long period of time before you can attack them again, and once you actually re-aggro them with Mutated Barge, not only do you not get any adrenaline from using Barge itself, you don't even get the buff from it anyway, so that kinda sucks. In the same vein, there are some boss specific bugs with Mutated Barge. Currently, for example, when you're moving from middle pool Yakamaru to another pool, You can't get any buff from Mutated Barge by barging over to another pool, which really sucks because it is the same boss. So yeah, Jagex, please look into these things. It's important because you're just kind of devaluing this ability otherwise. And the final con is that it is hella expensive, bruh. Like, trust me, you don't want to be wasting money on this if you don't have a ZGS. Trust me, this is not worth it if you do not have a ZGS. ZGS damage buff is way more. But if you do have that, and you have all the other fancy gizmos and stuff, I'd buy it because in some scenarios, like for Rago, I've heard, it is amazing. And yeah, it's really good. It does open up melee for a lot of bosses which, you know, previously weren't available. So it is expensive, but it definitely has its use in game. So yeah, kind of like a 6 out of 10 from me. Well, that about wraps it up, guys. That video took a very long time to make. I'm not joking. It took many hours and a lot of stress and a lot of research, etc, etc. But it was all worth it if it helped you guys, and if it did, please do leave a like down below. It means a lot. Please make sure to check out my Twitch and Twitter, and of course subscribe for lots more RS3 content. I love you all. I hope you have a fabulous day ahead of you. I hope you have the best RNG ever. I hope that every time you loot racks, you get a leg piece or a fang or whatever you want. May you enjoy your chicken nuggets like they were your last. Peace, and I'll see you very soon.